the calendar. It's This next section was a TBD, and so we are TBDing all over the place right now. My name is Chris Albrecht. I'm a writer and editor with thespoon.tech, and this is my boss, Mike Wolf. May seem a little self-serving. We're gonna let it go. We're the TBD, so we're just gonna TBD. But we both know what we're talking about. So we're gonna talk a little bit about some of the trends we've seen as we've written over the past couple of years on food and the convergence of food and technology. So Mike, I want to start, one of the big trends we've seen this year, one of the things that we're writing about a lot, is the evolution of recipes from inspiration to action. They're becoming shoppable, they're becoming discovery and commerce platforms. What's happening with the recipe? This is not just like the Betty Crocker cookbook anymore.
Well, I'm old at this point, kind of like you are, and I grew up with the stained cookbook that my mom would have, Betty Crocker. Still love that cookbook. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately for Tyler Florence, who predicted the recipe is dead, I think he had that actually wrong, because I think the recipe is really where a lot of action's happening. And like you said, Chris, it's becoming a commerce platform, it's becoming programmatic. People who are looking up recipes, whether it's on apps or online, and want to actually action that and make something, they're connecting now these recipe platforms to Amazon, or they're connecting to Instacart. So you can ultimately just have that food delivered same day, or maybe within a couple hours, and actually make that food. They're also becoming modular. So if you think about traditional recipes and the way you do this process, you get a recipe, you may go shopping, and your meal, your journey to a meal involves very specific linear steps. But it oftentimes doesn't work that way. I may open the fridge and have like 3 or 4 things that are going to go bad that day, or within the next couple of days, and I may not know how they go together.
Yeah.
So people were thinking about how you can take these recipes, these foods, and create a recipe based on like some interesting kind of software algorithm or whatever. So I think recipes are actually really interesting. There's a lot of people doing interesting things with them.
Yeah, and I wonder, I feel like they're stuck in the past, but they're advancing the future in weird ways. Yeah. So by that I mean they are becoming discovery platforms, right? Like, oh, that sounds really interesting. I like these things, and I can order it from my desk at work and have it arrive at my home by the time I get home, and I can make a meal. But they're also, I feel like the recipe, the format for it is still like the book, is still like the best avenue for that information, right? Because you don't get it dirty. If you do get dirty, it's fine. It like makes it a bit more authentic, as opposed to like a tablet, which you don't want to get wet or greasy or something like that. So it seems like it's something archival, but is also leading us into the future. It's sort of a weird, I mean, it's not as shoppable, right? So you're not gonna click on a page and have things arrive.
And I think that's important for people who are creating new apps and approaches to keep in mind. I think there's, you wanna give people all the different types of information they can use to make a meal, and they may discover a meal in an app or via Alexa, but it's actually really hard to cook with Alexa. Alexa telling you how much ingredients or how, like, that's not a way to cook. So you want a visual format. So I think it's important to have all these multimodal approaches, even if it's a very new approach, give people the list of ingredients so they can actually look at that and cook.
So that leads us sort of into the next thing that we've identified as sort of a big trend, is the guided cooking. So as Alexa talks to your LG fridge, which talks to your LG oven, right? Or the Heston system, there are guides out there that are walking you through this. What's happening sort of in the guided cooking space?
I mean, I wrote a blog post 2 years ago after coming home from from a houseware show. I saw the Heston Q. It was the first time I tried it, and as I said earlier, it was a revelation, because I was sitting there across from Phil Tessier, an award-winning chef. He won the gold medal for cooking with the U.S. team about a year ago, and it was very intimidating. It's like having Ken Griffey Jr. batting in front of him.
Gotta bring in the Seattle reference.
Right, but I was actually trying to cook fish in front of like this award-winning chef. It was really intimidating. But with this software framework and this connected pan, it actually walked me through it, and I actually felt like I cooked it well. And I've always been terrible at cooking fish. So I think that this was very early on, but like you fast forward to 2 years now, most of the large appliance makers are looking at software frameworks and this concept of guided cooking and ways to integrate it into their appliances as a way to help people just cook, because they know that most people are not expert chefs, they're not Philip Tessiers, and the variety of cooking expertise is a large continuum. So guided cooking is this way in which appliance makers think that you get people back in the kitchen.
What do you think is going to be the ultimate delivery mechanism for that, right? Like right now you'd have to get like Heston works with its thing, LG works with its thing, but you're gonna have to at some point jump from your whatever pan to your oven to your fridge. Like what's gonna be the bridge that connects all these different things together? Or will there be one?
Yeah, well, it's a great point. I mean, I think the challenge with like the phase we're in the kitchen space now is there's a lot of siloed software ecosystems. And if you look at the evolution of the smart home, that was definitely like that. You know, so you had like the HomeKits of the world, and you had the Google software, and like none of it is interoperable. And we're kind of getting better with the smart home more broadly. In the kitchen, we're still kind of in that phase where a lot of the, like, if I'm living in a Whirlpool ecosystem, I'm by and large staying in that Whirlpool ecosystem. And they're doubling down on Yumly, so it may stay that way. There are horizontal technologies like Alexa, and I think the voice control technologies actually are fairly horizontal, allow you to kind of stitch this stuff together. But I think that's quite honestly one of the biggest challenges. If you look at the kitchen operating system, there's a lot of different solutions, and a lot of times it's hard to jump from an LG into like a Bosch and then to a Whirlpool on a continuous, without having to switch apps. And who likes to switch to all these different apps? Because that's a real pain in the butt. So I think that's one of the challenges we're in. I think that's up to the appliance makers and we as influencers or writers to point that out, and they need to address that.
How many people, just like, you know, who we have here, how many people have a smart assistant in their home? How many people have Alexa? How many people have Google? Oh, you got both. All right, so you're all you're
a
all
super
in.
user.
Super user. How many Alexas do you have in your house?
I have, I think, 3 Alexas and 1 Google Home and no Cortanas.
Do you have the show with the screen?
I do have that.
What do you use that for? Like I just got one because I wanted my calendar to be kind of scrolly, but like.
So first of all, it looks like a circa 1995 like technology product. It's really super clunky. It's got a big butt on it, and just like it's ugly, but it's by far the most used Alexa device in our home. And here's like, I'm kind of like Joe. Like I rely on real people to actually see how receptive they are to it. And my wife thinks Alexa and voice assistants are ridiculous. She's like, why would I? But she loves the Echo Show, and it's this combination of like a video and kind of video information and audio that is magical for her.
Yeah.
And I use it a lot more because I just go and I constantly find when I'm walking in the kitchen, my eyes are just drawn to it, and maybe it's like a technology addiction problem I have, but I'm always looking at the Alexa because it has like a scrolling screen of information, like it's doing news bits all day.
Yeah.
And Amazon is training me to look at this thing, which is probably bad.
It's like the first. Well,
I don't know if I answered your question.
They're training you to do a lot.
Yeah, too much.
But how do you see? What do you see as Amazon? So we're based in Seattle, Amazon's backyard.
Yeah.
What do you see? Like, this is a very broad question, right? Because they've got their fingers in a lot of different pies.
Too many pies. Yeah.
360 branded pies, right? But what do you see them? What do you think their next moves are, right? So they've established Alexa, selling millions of those. They bought Whole Foods, right? They've just launched Amazon Go, which is fun. It's the store you walk in and you walk out, and you're shoplifting, but you're not shoplifting because you're actually paying for stuff. Where do you see, like, just looking at Amazon and the stuff that we put together, where are the next moves you see them going?
I mean, I think the world of e-commerce and the big tech giants have woken up to like how gigantic the food retail market is. It's after cars and houses, like food is like our biggest part of our spend, and like it took them way too long to realize that. And so Amazon.
Did it though? Like they've been trying for a long
I know,
time.
but has Google or Amazon? Like, I mean, Amazon's kind of like been doing lab experiments with like home delivery, but I think they got serious in the last couple of years. So I think the Whole Foods acquisition is a big deal, and I think the Whole Foods acquisition woke up the broader grocery market. I think what Amazon is doing now is just trying to reduce friction points along the way to getting food into your door faster, and part of that is just doing things like unattended access. So there's this idea that like ultimately what Amazon wants to do is just come into your home and maybe put a bag of groceries into your fridge.
Quick question, who would let Amazon in their home when you're not there? No one?
No one.
Even if you could watch it on video as it was being delivered?
It's kind of creepy, right? It's a little bit creepy.
It's a little weird.
Yeah.
But it's the future. So you're gonna, whether you want to or not.
Get with it, people. No, I mean, listen, I never thought that I would be comfortable with having like home cleaners come in my house, and ultimately after getting to know them for a while, I was comfortable with it. Now, there's issues around like the how frequent the delivery guy is and whether or not you know this delivery guy, but I think ultimately we may become more comfortable with it because business models force us to do things like get into strangers' cars sleep in strangers' beds, like an Airbnb or Uber that we weren't used to. So I think maybe this might take some training. I don't think that it'll be as widely adopted, but there's no doubt that Amazon and Walmart are trying to put the components in place to do things like come into our homes, maybe even put dinner on our table. They just were issued a patent about two weeks ago called around predictive restaurant ordering. So they actually want to predict what you might want from a restaurant and actually order it for you. And then if they have unattended access, who knows, maybe you show up and there's the meal
from your meal
on the dinner table.
What do you mean you don't want that?
Exactly. What do you mean you don't want it? So those are just a couple things I think Amazon's doing. They're super ambitious.
So I want to stick on that for a moment because they're so broad and we're at the Houseware show, right? So they bought Blink. They bought Blink last year, which did a connected doorbell and security cameras. And they did Ring just last week, right? So these are all connected devices that are attached to your home, right? Whereas Alexa is something you set on a counter, maybe you move it around. But now Amazon's literally being built into the framework of your house, right? So where do you see that? You know, our former colleague Stacy Higginbotham wrote that with the Blink acquisition, they actually got a chip that does image recognition. So there's the possibility for Amazon using a camera that you install in your house to kind of map your house. And that ties in sort of with the garden thing where they're using visual recognition to go like, oh, we see you're growing beans. Here's a deal on a steak or whatever that would go with that. Do you see the Ring acquisition as, I mean, obviously that sort of adds to their arsenal, but is there anything else that you see in that purchase?
For those of you who don't know, Ring is the #1 video doorbell provider. So, you know, Jamie, the founder of that, he was on Shark Tank. The story's been pretty well tracked. I mean, I think what they get in there is like an install base of probably close to 5 to 10 million front doors. So they actually know now who's at the front door in 5 to 10 million homes. The video doorbell market was really scoffed at 3 years ago. But it's one of these products that just in retrospect you kind of go, no duh, who doesn't want to know who's at their front door? And it's one of those things that isn't as creepy as, quite honestly, as like a lot of the other Amazon cameras that are in our home. It's actually facing outward, and we're actually a lot more comfortable with that. So I think what they're doing with that is not so much, they might want to get into home security. That's kind of an interesting market. If you start to think about the size of the home security market, $25 a month, 50 million homes, that starts to get interesting. But quite honestly, I think what they want more is to create the home service layer. And I think Ring gives them a platform to do more home services.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
There's also like the facial recognition, the image recognition technology that they already have a lot of capabilities there. But more broadly, Amazon isn't the only one. Nest and Google, Apple, they're all investing in technology that looks at things with cameras and gives you information and acts on it. And so who watches Silicon Valley on HBO, like have you seen the hot dog not hot dog app? Like it was pretty funny. So a lot of this technology kind of could be funny, but actually using technology to recognize food, recognize faces, I think that's a really important trend that's going to like change a lot of different things over the next coming years. So I think that'll be one to watch as well.
So let's move from that to sort of a burgeoning trend to see if it's going to actually happen. You've written about this. I think you kind of alluded to it in your question to the last talk. But the idea of tying an appliance with a subscription. You've got Tovala, Suvi is forthcoming, Nomiku, ChefSteps, right? But the bigger ones are the ones that intrigue me, like Tovala, which, for those of you who don't know, it's a connected oven and a meal kit service. So you have the oven, and then they cook the stuff, so the meals come in their separate little trays, and you put them all in at one time, and boom, your meal's all done at once, right? But other than that, you're not going to use it to like toast bread or cook anything else. So it seems like it becomes, for lack of a better term, like a dumb appliance that's just sitting there. Do you see much of a market in this sort of tying the two things together?
I think they're taking a gamble, and it's like running two startups at once. So it's a heavy lift. I mean, I've been amazed what Tovala has been able to do, basically starting like a Blue Apron type of company and creating a smart oven. The challenge there is, and I think Joe and Lisa alluded to it, is like you want to be able to deviate from like this small subscription product and cook other food. Because quite honestly, if you're buying a product from a startup and they go out of business, I mean, there's a picture last week of a Juicero sitting in a Goodwill somewhere for $40, and it was really kind of sad. Like it just made me so sad looking at that. And so Who knows? I'm not saying I think Taval is a great company,
Yeah.
or I think Sous Vide is a great company, but that's the risk of those companies. So I think the good news is you can cook other products with those other food products with those companies. But if you're captive in an ecosystem like a Juicero, I think that's a little bit more of a problem. I think it's a similar problem that Teforia had. Teforia was this connected tea maker, very expensive.
$1,000.
Very expensive, but you're kind of captive within the Teforia ecosystem. And so that doesn't give you the kind of freedom that you want if you're like a home buyer. So I think the challenge for these companies is, if you want to make things really easy, great, but don't limit the choices consumers have. Consumers don't like that.
Well, and that also goes against the idea of cooking, right? I don't cook that well, but because it requires a lot of improvisation and being able to like, oh, I don't have this, I can add this. Well, that scares me because I'm like, oh, well, then now it's going to taste horrible, right?
Yeah.
So I don't, that's not what I usually do. So the idea of constricting people into these lanes limits sort of the fun and freedom that comes with cooking. Now I understand there's also the idea of everybody works, they get home, they may not necessarily have time to cook, beautifully bake a salmon and throw all the other ingredients together, but it also seems to kind of go at odds with kind of the joy that cooking brings a lot of people.
But on the other hand, if you help people tap into something that is very unapproachable, that they aspire to, then I think that's interesting. So it's a much different use case, but like, I always wanted to make beer at home. Like, I was kind of like homebrew curious.
Yeah.
But my wife is like, no, I'll divorce you, kind of, if you start becoming the home beer brewer guy. But then
then you've got like buckets and bottles and like
I'd start
industrial
tubing,
tubing,
I'd grow a beard and
bleaching
wear a utility
everything.
kilt, and it'd be all the downhill from there. But like then came the Pico Brew.
Yeah.
And the Pico Brew has this subscription model. You kind of have to buy it from them, but like I'm okay with that because, like I said, I want to be able to homebrew. Now, if you go to Reddit or you go to the homebrew forums, they kind of mock you because like, oh, you're not homebrewing. Like they're like the real deal. I could care less if the guys at Reddit and the homebrew forum are saying.
Really?
Like, I could tell people at a party I brew my own beer, and they think I brew my own beer. Not that but like it's kind of fun to do. But I'm not the kind of guy who wants to invest 1,000 hours and get really good at brewing beer. But I want to brew beer at home. So
and to go through all the garbage beer that you create while
exactly. So that has a subscription service. You buy the grains and the hops from them, and it's fairly turnkey. But it's you're actually brewing beer. So I think in those types of scenarios where you can tap into a passion, you do something that's fairly hard to get at unless you have this technology, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. True story. I just realized Pico Brew was almost like Peekaboo. I never thought of that before.
Yes.
It's tiny.
Yeah.
I'm a genius. You heard it here. I'm pretty smart. But that leads us into like this next trend, which is the idea of robots, right? Like we wanted robots forever.
Yeah.
They're starting to become a reality in the home, whether they're for companionship. There's the Curry. There's the Giro, I want to say, I can't remember, but robots are coming into the home and in different aspects into the kitchen. Where like there's the industrial side of robots, right? So you see Amazon and Walmart deploying robots in the warehouse. We just wrote about Walmart getting issued a patent for a robotic shopping cart, which would follow you around so you could put stuff in or guide you to things. Yeah. Where do you see sort of, I don't know, there's a big discussion to be had about robots displacing humans, but let's start off small. We'll start off in the home and then kind of go bigger. Where do you see, a lot of people think robots are going to be this biped that walks around and calls you sir and has this metallic voice, but that's not really what robots are going to be in the house.
No, I mean, I think there's this philosophical question we could get into is like, what is a robot?
But like, just bore everybody.
Yeah, I mean, we've had this conversation on the podcast with your friend who's a robot expert,
Sina.
I mean, at one point, washing machines were probably considered robots, but now they're just like
that's automation.
They're automated appliances. So Sous Vide, that startup that is doing this 4-zone cooking device, they call themselves a robot. But I'm not sure if that's more marketing or because it doesn't feel necessarily like what we think of robots. So I think, quite honestly, robots in the home are going to be slower to come. Then they're definitely going to be in like the restaurant space or in the food retail space or these types of space because there where you have high repetition tasks. Yeah. And it just makes more sense to have robots. The cooking robot in the home, I haven't really necessarily seen anything. I've seen things like, for example, the Thermomix, which automates certain things. Yeah. And I wouldn't call it a robot, but it's on that continuum of automation to kind of do some things for you and follow some steps. But it's not necessarily a robot. So I think where I kind of see things happening, at least in the next 5 years or more, on the kind of light automation side, following routines, but not like the humanoid robot walking around the home.
Yes. Now, we've covered a lot of different topics. Again, this section was TBD, so to be determined at all. But are there any questions on any sort of broad food tech topics from anybody in the audience a burning question you want to know? We may or may not know the answer to. Okay, well, yes. I'll tell Michael do it. The visual recognition, Amazon's visual recognition of the garden.
Oh, they've gotten issued a patent that basically they put a camera in your backyard and watches like your garden, and then will automatically order stuff for you. So it's just another example of like how they're basically using visual information like cameras to basically process. Oh, this is a situation we see where they have a garden, they have green beans. The green beans need to be refreshed, and they'll just order for you. So that was really what we were referring to. So
yeah. So, but it's the idea of using computer vision and machine learning and Amazon's massive computational abilities to go like, oh, we're going to stick this back here. We can see just by looking at it. You don't have to tell us anything. We know what you're growing, and then that's a way for them to recommend other items for you to purchase inside, for inside your home. Which I think also kind of gets also the idea of Roomba mapping your house and knowing what you have inside. So just understanding, all the things that go along with that, right? Like, oh, it knows that you have a credenza here or a piano, and maybe that could be used for what other purposes?
And that's a great point. I mean, I think actually the most advanced space in home robotics is vacuum cleaners. I mean, and so you look at all the mountain patents that iRobot has around basically robotics in the home, they're probably the leader. And so using things like LiDAR and machine vision and doing that map of your home gives opportunities for companies like iRobot to extend into other things like elder care and types of services. Because once you have that visual understanding of what's in the home, that's actually really valuable information. Our old boss, a guy named Paul Waborski, he went to the New York Times. He's actually working on a startup focused on that visual information in the home type of thing. So I think that's a real big opportunity, and that's why Amazon and the Googles of the world are investing in that, because they know ultimately that can unleash unlock lots of services.
Yeah. So as in our final minutes here, you wrote a number of trends to watch out for this year. What's one thing people here at the Houseware show, what's something they should be paying attention to?
I think coffee is really interesting. There's lots of interesting coffee startups I'm seeing. There's a new startup doing a home roasting appliance that they're coming to a Kickstarter very, very soon. There's that French press company that we just covered.
The No Mess French press?
Yeah, it's a No Mess French press. He had a patent. Because have you ever done the French press? You get the grounds, it's a mess. This guy had actually figured out a way to do that, just screw off the bottom. No Mess French press, he got a patent for it. And he just killed it. It became the #1 coffee product ever on Kickstarter. I think he did like a million.
He did over a million,
Did over a million. So I think coffee's really interesting. I think I get excited longer term around new cooking technologies, new heating elements.